Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Sisto Says, powered by Design 2147, a New York City building and code expediting company. Today, I'm privileged again to have Ashley with me, DiNardo from Cozen O'Connor Public Strategies. Big promotion. Now she's a senior principal. So congratulations, Ashley, and welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So, Ashley, last year you were on the show. I can't believe I think we're up to episode 70 now. Time flies, but so does policy. So does the City of Yes. And when you came on the show last year, we talked a lot about the process of changing neighborhoods, how city planning works, how New York City government works to do that. And openly, this was not done by design, but yesterday we had a little HubSpot calendar issue, so we had to postpone the shooting of the show, but it actually worked out great for the topic you and I are going to talk about today, which is the City of Yes, which was voted on yesterday. So if we want to dive right into it, tell us a little bit about the vote, tell us what it really means, and maybe give the audience a little bit of an update of where City of Yes was when it was first talked about for the housing portion by Mayor Eric Adams.
Terrific. Well, thanks again for having me back.
Always.
I think this is my third appearance on the podcast, believe it or not. And when I first came on, the mayor had just outlined his 3 City of Yes proposals. So there was the City of Yes for carbon neutrality that was passed to promote green energy and new technology. There was City of Yes for economic development, which I think we really dove into the last time I was on the show,
right.
To make it easier
for small businesses
to really thrive in the city. But the big proposal was just getting underway. So as you mentioned yesterday, we had a big day at City Hall. The vote was a little delayed, but last night the City Council's subcommittee on zoning and franchises and their full land use committee voted to move forward with modifications to the mayor's proposal. It was a wide-ranging proposal meant to develop additional housing throughout the city. And I think as Dan Garodnick, the chair of city planning, put so well in his public comments, this proposal was really developed to build a little more housing everywhere, right?
Versus, not to interrupt you, but just for the viewers and for the listeners, is that a lot of times zoning changes take place and they're very specific to a very specific neighborhood. But this was more about being able that you don't have to add 1,000 units in one neighborhood. It's about adding maybe 50 in a neighborhood and 50 in another neighborhood, and 50 and 50 and 50 all over 5 boroughs adds up rather quickly, even though we do have higher density where there's bigger volume. But I think that the whole concept of this was more spreading it out instead of it being more specific. And I always felt that that's what their intent was when I kept reading it. So tell us a little bit about how, because I know some of the boroughs and the community boards that are further out from the core, right, they have lower density, and those are big changes for those neighborhoods because of the low density. So what was their reaction like?
Absolutely. Well, it was controversial.
As it should be.
Exactly. Anytime there's a bold plan and a citywide plan, you will have any number of opinions, right? There are, 9 million New Yorkers, and we all have, at least one opinion.
At least.
And so there were concerns from lower density districts about how some of the aspects of City of Yes would impact their communities.
Correct.
So, for example, one of the proposals in the original plan would do away with parking minimums,
right.
Which, as many of your listeners
throughout the
know,
entire city.
Throughout the entire city, right? Already, if you're building in, say, the core of Manhattan, you don't need to include parking in your development, but in a lot of other places, you do.
Well, right here in Brooklyn, we were always required. That was part of, quality housing, right?
Right.
We had to give them 50% of the units, and that was a big deal.
Yep, and it's incredibly expensive, and it takes up real estate.
Right. And not apartments.
Exactly. And in areas close to a subway or a train, it's often underutilized. And so the city proposed doing away with those. But in districts where you do have higher levels of car ownership, communities were very apprehensive about bringing in additional residents and what that does for on-street parking and sort of their quality of life. And so as part of the council's modifications.
What I had read this morning, and again, they're articles, and obviously this is still subjective because it's not ratified yet. They're going to go for a vote December 5th, right? City Council, I believe, is the next step.
Correct.
So when I was reading it, it really made a lot of sense to me. Just flying little birdie in the sky, looking down, saying, okay, well, you're in the core, and most people in the middle of Manhattan use mass transit. They don't have, or most people prefer not to have cars, right? So why would you give them parking? And then the next place, it was, well, maybe it's a little bit of both, so we'll give them some parking, but not as much. But yet, when we go way out into the end where it is really relied upon to use a vehicle because of it, we're going to change that zoning there. So I think that there was a good thought process to it. But as I always say, the thought process and the implementation is where what you do every day for your firm, where you represent a lot of times the community and sometimes you actually represent the developers. So you have to find that balance. And I think this part of the zoning is trying to find a little bit of that balance.
Absolutely. I think, what we do at Cozen every day on the public strategy side is try to help our clients navigate these conversations, right? And how do you bridge the gap between what our client, a developer, may want to build and what the community wants to see.
Correct.
And create a real win-win where we're delivering housing in a period where we have a severe housing crisis.
Yes.
And really, I don't want to say improve the community, but really strengthen the fabric of that community.
Well, and again, Sheldon Lobel once told me many, many years ago as a mentor of mine that he helped with the 1961 zoning resolution. And if you think about it, this is probably the largest major change in 63 years to come about. That's a long time. Yes. Things have changed in New York City in 63 years.
A little bit.
Okay.
I think, again, I know we've spoken about it when I've been on the show in the past. Change is difficult, but it was really necessary. And I think, the fact that in addition to the changes to the zoning code that will go into effect when this is approved next month, there was also a significant contribution both from the city and
the state.
Right.
I thought I saw Governor Hochul proposed
Yes.
$5 billion.
So there's a total of $5 billion that was agreed to yesterday. $4 billion from the city and an additional $1 billion from the state, which it's the first time that I can recall in which the state has come to the table with that type of investment.
Well, they became a 20% partner. That's big.
And during a ULURP, essentially, right? I think that's a real recognition that at every level of government,
we need that.
We need the resources.
100%.
I think, there's been a lot of discussion about how many units the city of Yes will actually create. It's projected with these changes, it'll be an additional 80,000 units over the next 15 years, in addition to what would already be built. That is significant.
It is.
But it's not the silver bullet.
No.
Right?
And I was just that was exactly not to be a downer, but, I've been in this expediting world, code consulting world for close to 40 years. And until I started the podcast, I didn't realize how much power the partnership of private development and government have together. And so many guests have opened my eyes to it because I just was naive to it. And I'm being 100% blunt because I didn't realize that developers, it doesn't work without their support. So if we could get the city of Yes going in this direction, and we could get 485X to get some way, somehow for that to work, and we can buy into that, and you put the two together, we'll build housing. Developers will build until they go out of business. That's what they do. But that doesn't mean they'll build here. The biggest issue that I saw is when places like New Rochelle or Mount Vernon changed their zoning to allow these bigger type buildings along their transit lines, it exploded. So developers are like, well, we know how to build here. We could build there too. And we could build in Long Island, and we can build in New Paltz, New York, and we can build in Kingston, New York. You know, building is building. So I'm very optimistic with the city of Yes, and hopefully with some of these other programs that we'll get back into the when we built a lot of units under 421A and quality housing where it was 80-20 or 70-30, but we were turning a lot of units out, and you worked on a lot of them because you were part of that zoning process.
Yeah. I think the other thing that really sticks out from yesterday's vote and this $5 billion package of investments that the city and state have committed to is that, yes, it is about, what are the incentives and programs that we need to build new housing. But there's also, I believe it's $2 billion in infrastructure improvements,
course.
right? You can't build.
If you don't have water, gas, and electric,
upgrade
you can't,
the sewage system or plan for schools
Right.
and open space, right? Those are all critical components to communities. And
Sure.
I think that was some of the concern that that I heard in speaking with folks in the council, and we certainly heard it from community boards. This was a citywide effort, and in sort of a more neighborhood-wide planning process. Those are all things that council members are able to negotiate with the city, right? When you look at some of whether it's Long Island City or Atlantic Avenue, these neighborhood-wide rezonings that are in process now, those are the things that they're talking about at the neighborhood level of, okay, if we're going to change the zoning,
This is what happens.
how do we plan for other services?
Right.
To make
And
sure
that's
these
always been
communities
one
are
of my
served?
contentions, when I do have guests on and we talk about it. We talked about office to residential conversion. We talk about changing this district to that. When people move in there, the dynamics of that neighborhood change drastically. Mm-hmm. Where do you shop? Where do your kids go to school? Where do you drop off your children to daycare? One of the things that we do a lot of is we right now on the buildings that we TCO'd a year and a half ago, a lot of the retail space we have on the first floor, I want to say 1 out of every 2 buildings that we do, one of them is a daycare. Mm-hmm. One. Because you just moved 250 people into a building. Now, what are the demographics and the percentages? But the percentage is awfully high that they're young families who are working, regardless of whoever's living in the building, people need daycare. Mm-hmm. So that was a use that it wasn't as prevalent as it is now. And I think that one of the things that I found very enlightening when I read The City of Yes is that I think this time around, they took a lot of time to understand the uses that neighborhoods need, mm-hmm. right? For anything. Some of them were so antiquated, making, potato sacks. Okay, well, no one's making potato sacks in New York City anymore, but it was in our zoning resolution. Mm-hmm. So I think they did a really good job to understand how to make it easier for small businesses to get in the bigger neighborhoods and the smaller neighborhoods and reward the neighborhoods for people to have access to these things.
Right. And I think the other thing that I think it's important to remember is that the city of yes doesn't mean that, it's not like tomorrow we're going to have 80,000 additional units, right?
That is the greatest point that you've made before, and you need to tell the audience a little bit about, the process, because we keep seeing all the buzz in the newspaper, but now there's this thing that happens.
Right. I think, City of Yes is about making it easier to build so that certain types of developments don't have to go through a lengthy public approval process, I should say lengthy and very costly public approval process, right? That hinders development of needed housing units. This just makes it easier. It opens up what's allowed, and so you may be able to add an accessory dwelling unit if you have a basement or a backyard that can be converted, a garage. You may be able to add, an additional
story on your building.
Exactly, and get some affordability in there without going through such a long process. So I think, these changes will come over time. I mean, I was in City Hall
So like on a timeline, so they vote in December. God willing, they pass it with the modifications, right? And then what's the next step? What's the implementation? Where does it go after December 5th? And what's the timeline for us to see it in a zoning resolution?
So it's relatively quick, and a land use attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, but there is, a standard veto period where the mayor could veto it. Obviously, that's not going to happen. This is his proposal.
So hopefully not.
And, once that period
is over,
elapses, it will go in the zoning resolution.
Okay, so forecasting a couple of months?
Start planning, right? I think obviously it takes time.
But do you think a couple of months is the time period, or is it faster than that? I mean, we're not going to quote you on it. I'm just
Don't go beyond.
I'm trying to figure out. So December 5th, it happens, goes through this period, and then all of a sudden, and the reason I ask that is because probably after it happens, developers will be calling our office and asking us questions. So when should I expect to see this? Can I forecast this? And those are all questions that your office is going to get, because developers are going to call you and say, hey, Ashley, we've been waiting 2 years for this. It's here now. We're ready to go. What's happening? You're like, wait, hold on. Right?
I think the great thing is that, now that we have the modified proposal, people can start planning, right?
Okay, great.
You may not be able to file your plans right away,
but you could project it.
But we know what the text will look like, and people can start understanding what may be feasible for them, and hopefully move forward.
Great.
The other thing, just going back to the investments that were committed, because I think that, to the council's credit, they pushed very hard to get not just changes that they wanted to see in the zoning text,
but they got money,
but the real investment. And part of that pot of money is additional resources for agencies.
Right, I saw that for the building department, for
HPD, for city planning,
for the vouchers for people to get apartments, to make that easier for the general public.
Right. And so I think hopefully that combined with these amendments to, again, make it easier.
Makes a good recipe.
I think it does. I really hope it does.
Well, Ashley, before we wrap up, I did want to ask you a very specific question, because it's asked to me all the time. There's proposed changing Long Island City, Atlantic Avenue, the Garment Center, Midtown South. They're independent of the city of Yes.
Correct.
So a lot of times they're mixed in together, but in reality they're very separate. Could you give us a little bit of what you're hearing in the ULIP world about those three areas, and what's that process look like? Which ones are closer than others? I know Long Island City's been on it for a while. I know Atlantic Avenue is really starting to heat up. And of course, we've talked about the Garment District for a while because of the empty buildings. So if you could, because independent of the city of Yes.
Absolutely. I would categorize City of Yes as sort of the umbrella changes to the zoning citywide. These neighborhood-specific plans, as you mentioned, are all moving on their own timelines. The Atlantic Avenue proposal, AIM Up, they're calling it.
Aim up. I like it.
Which is really being led by the council member, Crystal Hudson, in that district.
Wow.
She pushed the administration to take a new look at Atlantic Avenue, which I think is really prime for
It's such a beautiful
development
wide street.
Yeah.
It's great.
And I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, the reason that she and frankly the community board pushed the city to do a more comprehensive plan for Atlantic Avenue is because they were seeing all of these individual proposals to rezone sites along.
Right, so instead of doing a big one, they were doing it site by site, which is
Right.
costly for government and costly for the developers.
Right. And I think, her perspective was that the community may not be getting everything that they should be getting, right? You can't negotiate with a private developer about sewer upgrades, right? That's a
Right.
conversation that really needs to be had at scale. And so that's where City of Yes and these individual
Will help that because they're going to
proposals.
get the money to help that boost
Exactly. So that is in ULURP right now. I believe it's at the community board. Midtown South is expected to be certified into ULURP early next year. So that's moving forward.
it. We need that.
And Long Island City, that process, right? People have been talking about Long Island City for a long time.
As long as
It's still in the early planning stages,
right,
but
it's really
moving
more
forward very quickly.
for the outlying areas outside the business zone.
Correct.
Right, because that's now they're getting this mixture of these big buildings, manufacturing, light manufacturing, heavy commercial, and yet we have these pockets all around where the transition is happening. So we're very much in tune with it. But again, I think just the idea that they're thinking about the change and they're spending time and just like Atlantic Avenue, they recognize the need, for it to work for both sides, not just for the developer and not just for the city. The partnership, and like I said, one thing that I've learned over the last several years is that partnership, when it's right, does great things. It really does.
It does. And I think, Chair Garodnick, Deputy Mayor Maria Torres Springer, the Adams administration, and at the council level too, there's been a lot of leadership and a
good.
lot of people willing to stand up and say, we need to build and we need to have these difficult conversations because the status quo
It's not going to work.
It hasn't been sustainable.
No, and
So
that's why we
need
keep
to have a
falling
change.
further and further behind.
Yeah.
So as you know, we always end the show. Always put everybody on the spot. You're not, Andrew Peters' famous line, I'm in the estimating world. I need to look forward, not backwards. So we have a great topic to talk about today, which I appreciate you coming in as an expert, being there, hearing it, living it, being part of it, Ashley. I couldn't have asked for anyone better to come in and talk about it. So thank you so much for with your busy schedule to come in and tell the audience about this. Projecting the next couple of years, because what we talk about isn't days or months, but it's years. The impact of City of Yes. What do you believe that what they passed and what they're seeing is going to be close to their expectations in terms of housing?
I think it will, and maybe not right away, right? Not in year one or year two. But as you mentioned early on, these things add up, and that's exactly what we've seen with things like mandatory inclusionary housing, right? It makes it easier to build and to get all levels of affordable housing, right? The lower income.
And I think
market
affordable
rate.
should be in every neighborhood in some form or another. Affordable housing in downtown Brooklyn is quite different than affordable housing in Coney Island. But yet we're building it in Coney Island. We could build it wherever. The programs have to be in place to incentivize the developers and the government to build and create bigger and better neighborhoods.
Right. And, again, I think Dan Gronick put it well. Some of this is about building that missing middle housing, right?
Right.
For families who may not qualify for the lowest income units, but can't afford a market rate unit.
Correct.
Right?
And
New
there's
York
a
is losing
lot
those
of that
families,
middle.
and we need to keep them in the city,
Right.
or else,
They're going to leave.
exactly.
Well, Ashley, thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Looking forward to always having you on. And I thank you for being such a great subject matter expert, being on the ground, living it, and coming to tell the story. So look forward to having you back next time.
Great. Well, thanks so
Thank
much for
you.
having me.